another webinar, question making and assessment building. So we've decided to kind of separate those out. So we'd love to hear feedback. There will be a survey at the end. So let us know kind of what you think about this being separate than the assessment building, because it's a new thing for us. So we're excited to hear your feedback. Before we get started, I do kind of want to see what kind of audience we have here. So we have a poll that we're going to start for you that says, how many webinars have you attended in the past? So are you guys expert webinar attenders? Are you newer webinar attenders? We'd love to see kind of who our audience is. So it looks like a majority of you have attended a couple webinars before, so that's pretty exciting. Again, if you have any feedback for us with you expert webinar people, go ahead and let us know at the end during that survey. So we'll go ahead and jump into the material. So the first thing we're going to talk about is categories. And for those of you that aren't familiar with categories, categories are essentially a way to tag your questions with keywords and learning outcomes so that you can really measure data on all of your questions. Categories are essentially what drives our reports, what you want to measure at your institution. So it's really customizable to your institution, depending on what your needs are, what your accreditation standards are, board competencies, all that sort of stuff. So with categories, you can create categories that assess learning outcomes, teaching methods. So maybe you wanna see which teaching method is the most effective. If you tag your questions based on what type of teaching taught the students that information, you can later run reports and say, of all the questions that were taught through a lecture, 70% of those are correct, but all of the ones that were taught through a web module have 80 to 90% correct. So maybe web modules are a little bit more effective, and you're able to kind of assess that very easily. Accreditation standards. So I know a lot of you go through accreditation probably every few years, or you're looking to start going through accreditation, and there's a huge list of standards that you guys have to meet, and it's impossible to keep track of it all. But for your curriculum standards, if you put those in ExamSoft as a category, it's really simple, because when you tag questions with those, you can run a report at the end that says, this is what we're assessing on. And not only this is what we're assessing on, but this is how students are performing in that area. So it's a great tool for accreditation purposes. When those accreditors come, you click a button, run a report, and they're impressed because you have all of the data right there in front of them. And then things like subject matter. You want to know how people are performing on bio or chem or English or whatever the case may be. You can see that very, very detailed. So when you tag those questions with those categories, you get a lot of benefits from there. You get to see strengths and weaknesses, and that's on the level of students, entire classes, and entire programs. You can even meet accreditation guidelines very easily, and you can even find trends. So curriculum trends, maybe you're not teaching this certain subject area enough. It's not in enough courses. You're able to identify that and rectify it so that students are getting a better education.
Yep. So just starting with how do we create these categories. So you'll want to click the category button right there at the top of your screen, and that's going to bring you to the main categories page. And we'll talk a little bit about the folder structure in 1 second, but first, to create a new category, you'll just click that Create New Category button. And what that's going to do is bring up a modal window that will allow you to enter the title of the category and also the destination folder. So your folder structure is going to be the way that you want to organize your category. So however you want to make it easy for the faculty to find them and quickly tag questions to them. So you have a lot of flexibility here. You can have your main categories, your subcategories, and even if you notice right below that, super subcategories. You can get as detailed as you want there. However you really want to organize it, just to keep everything in the right order and make it easy for faculty to find the categories again. So before we go jumping into questions, which is, the main part of this webinar, we just want to release another poll to you guys, see what type of questions are you most curious about. So we have multiple choice, true, false, and essay, and fill in the blank. So just wondering where your interest lies in those 4 question types. So take a second and fill that out, and then we'll jump right into the questions portion of the webinar. Okay, so it looks like this is 100% multiple choice interested crowd over here, so that's good. That is actually the one that we spend the most time on. It does have the most options to it, so glad that we'll be able to satisfy your interest in the in the multiple choice.
All right, so we'll jump right into questions. You know that the questions tab is right there at the top of ExamSoft, so you can click that and it'll take you to a page that looks like this. Before we actually talk about creating the questions, there is these question folders that we do want to talk about. Question folders are really a way for you to organize your questions. You want to be able to find questions very easily, and these are all completely customizable to your institution. So if it makes more sense for you to organize it by year and then course and then exam, you can do that. Or if it makes more sense to organize by faculty, you can create faculty named folders so that each faculty member has their own folder. So there's a lot of different options, and I've seen a lot of schools do it in a lot of different ways. So it's really up to you and how you want to organize it. We just want to make sure that you know where your questions are and that you can find them when you need them. So next to the first folder that you'll have in your system is this items folder. And next to it, you'll see this little gear icon, and you'll see this on every single folder as we go through. And what that little gear icon does is it allows you to create new folders, edit folders, delete folders, and share folders. So creating new folders is pretty self-explanatory. You create it, you give it a name, and you have a new folder. Editing the folder allows you to rename it or move it to a different location. So maybe we want this first year folder to actually be under the first course, the ESU nursing course. We would be able to go ahead and do that. You also have the option of deleting a folder. Keep in mind you can only delete an empty folder. You'd have to move those questions out of the way first before you delete that folder. And then sharing folder. Depending on your permissions, you may or may not have access to this icon to share a folder, but this allows you to give somebody else permissions to this folder. So maybe a TA or a co-faculty member, or whatever the case may be.
So like we mentioned, we have our 4 question types. We're going to start with multiple choice, but just to let everyone know, for ease of use, all questions have about the same format. You're going to see the options for the questions on the left, and then the text and answer choices on the right. So just to dive right in here, the first thing that I want to point out is the question ID. Now this is a unique identifier for each question. It's a great way to search for questions. If you wanted to have a colleague reference a question, this is a good thing to give them just so they can find it easily. You can also enter a title for the question. It's not required. If you leave it blank, it'll pull in the first 20 characters of the question stem. The folder is required. So like Aubrey mentioned, you're going to want to store your questions somewhere, something that makes sense, something that will make it easier to find when you eventually pull them into an assessment. Next, we have the group field. Now, this is a really cool feature that allows you to create vignettes of questions. So say you have a group of questions that you want to stay together in exam. Maybe they reference the same case study or they have to do with the same subject. What you can do is label each question with the same group name, and that will ensure that those questions stay together even on a randomized exam. So the location of the group of questions could change, but those questions in the group will always stay together. So it's definitely a cool little feature. Next is the status. We'll talk a little bit more about draft versus approved in a second, but this is also where you can see that. So here's where you add categories. Like we've mentioned before, we really can't emphasize enough. I mean, this is where the real awesome reporting capability comes in. So we try to make it as easy as possible for faculty to tag questions. So what you do is hit that Add Category button, and this brings up a little window. You're going to see your whole category tree, and then you'd simply just hit those plus signs next to the ones you want to assign to that question. And then back on the main question screen, you'd see that in that category section. So it's a good way to just quickly scan and make sure that your questions are tagged with at least the minimum categories that you want to report on. Next, we have the options section. The weight is editable here as well as when you add the question to an assessment, so you can change it in either place. Randomized choices, pretty self-explanatory. You can scramble the choices for each student kind of just to add that extra layer of security. So for multiple answers, so what if your multiple choice question has more than one correct answer? We have a couple ways to handle that. So we have our partial credit and select all that apply checkboxes. With partial credit, what you would be doing is, say for example, there's 3 correct answers. If the student answered 2 out of 3 of those correct, they would get 2/3 of the credit. With select all that apply, it works a little bit differently. The student would have to get all 3 answers correct in order to get any credit. So if they got 2 out of 3, they would get no credit. One of the things to point out with that is with partial credit, if there's 3 correct answers, they're going to be restricted to only selecting 3 choices. With select all that apply, they will be able to select as many answer choices as they think are correct. The system's not going to stop them. You have the ability to enter question level attachments, images, video, audio, and PDF. The file types as well as the size limits are listed on your screen. So rationale, this lets you enter an explanation of the question for the student. So you might be able to explain why the correct answer is correct or why this question is relevant. You can also include the rationale in certain reports and even let the students see it during secure exam review, just to give them a little bit of insight on that question. Internal comments, exactly what it sounds like. If you have more than one staff member working on a question, this might be a good way to have them communicate edits to each other, and it works a lot like the chat feature. You can see your name and the time of the comment. So here's where we have our main question area. So you have the question stem up here. You'll have some basic formatting options at the top, much like you'd see somewhere in Word. And then below you'd have the answer choices. You can have up to 26 answer choices, 1 for each letter of the alphabet. To the right of that, you'll see a couple of columns. The correct is where you would, of course, mark which answer or answers are correct. The lock column allows you to lock an answer choice's position in place. So even if you randomize the choices, say you wanted all of the above to always be the last choice, you can lock that as choice E, and that won't move regardless of if you randomize the choices. The position lets you move the answer choice up and down, and the little red X there lets you delete. And you can also down here add a new answer choice, so that's pretty easy. We also have answer comments, much like we have internal comments for the question. Once you're done working on your question, you have a couple options on how to save it. So clicking the Save button will save the question as a draft. That allows you to come back in, make edits, make changes. You cannot add a draft question to an exam, however. So in order to add it to an exam, you want to approve it. What that does is say, this is final, kind of stamp that approved on it. You won't be able to make much more changes to it without creating a new version of it, and Aubrey will get into that in a few minutes. So next we have true or false. Again, you're going to see a lot of the same options on the left side. I mean, you don't see partial credit. Things that don't apply to true or false are obviously missing. You'll see a similar question box, and then the true and false answer choices are already there for you. You just want to select which one is the correct one.
All right, so next we have the essay question, and the essay question is pretty self-explanatory. Like she said, the options are very similar. The only difference you're going to see is this character limit option. And what this does is it limits the number of characters that a student can type when they're typing their answer. So if you want them to be limited to a certain number of characters, go ahead and write that there. As far as the essay question, you go ahead and write the question. Again, very similar formatting options for you to use. And then you have those save and approve options again. And then finally, we have the fill in the blank. So on the left side, it's very similar. You do have a partial credit option here. That is available for if you have multiple blanks in your fill in the blank question. So if your fill in the blank question had 5 blanks, and the student gets 3 of those blanks right, when this box is checked, they're going to get 3/5 of your weights, which you can see right there. So that's only going to be in use when there are more than 1 blank on this question. So now with the fill in the blank question, you're going to see this new button that says Add New Blank, and this is where you indicate where the actual blank is located. So when you click that button, you'll see that it brings up a little box with a number in it, and then you'll see there's a place to write the correct answer that corresponds to that number below it. So you'll see blank was the first president, and then I'll have my correct answer listed there. All of the students' responses that they type into SoftTest is going to compare to my answer that I wrote in that number 1 box. Now, in many cases, you may have more than one acceptable answer. So for this one, I may accept George Washington, I may accept Washington, I may accept G. Washington. So as a faculty member, I'm being a little lenient. I accept just the last name. I am definitely able to indicate that here. So what I would do is you're going to use the vertical bar between your answers. And the vertical bar can be found by holding the Shift button and pressing the slash that's above your Enter key on your keyboard. And that will allow you to put that vertical bar in and separate your different answers. Now, any student that types George Washington will get it correct, and any student that types Washington will get it correct. You can then go and add a new blank if you want to. You're able to add up to 5 blanks. So you can click that Add New Blank button up to 5 times. It'll create a little box with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a place to write the answers for 1 through 5. Now we also use fill-in-the-blank questions as our matching questions. So we don't have a specific matching question available right now, but we do have a workaround using the fill-in-the-blank question. So what you're going to do is you're going to format it much like you formatted it here. You could use a table if you wanted to line up the items. It's really up to you, but it does allow you to see the blanks over here and then the answer choices on this side. As a student, I may write C, or I may write black, and so as a faculty member, I indicate that both of those are the correct answers using that vertical bar. So that kind of helps to alleviate any problems that may come up because the student wrote one thing or another or whatever the case may be. So that's really a great feature. All right, so before we actually talk about importing questions, we want to just take a minute, have you guys decompress a little bit. We gave you some good information so far, and see if you guys have any questions. I know I saw a question or two come in while we were actually talking, so we'll go ahead and address those right now out loud. But if you do have any further questions, please go ahead and type those in the question box, and we'll be happy to read them aloud now. So one of the questions we got is, where is it here? Oh, how many categories can you tag to a question? So that's a really great question. You can actually tag as many categories as you want. So if you want to tag 15 different categories to a question or 100, you're able to do that, and it's going to report on all of those for you. Somebody asked, can you take spelling into account for fill-in-the-blank questions? So I'm not 100% sure exactly what you mean with that question, but I think that you're looking at how the students respond. Maybe they misspelled something when they responded. If that's the case, the system compares directly to what you put. I'll go back here. What you put in these little correct answer fields, but so if they did misspell it, they're going to get it wrong initially. But you do have an option after the exam in the Adjust Scoring section, and you can learn more about Adjust Scoring in the Analyzing Assessments section of the the Analyze Assessments webinar, that we offer. But essentially within the Adjust Scoring, you're able to see a list of all of the student responses very easily, and you can very easily accept them as you go down. So maybe you do want to be a little lenient, accept that spelling mistake. It's very simple to do it. You'll literally just see a list and a green plus sign that you can click to choose which ones are acceptable and which ones are not acceptable. So, and then we had another question about how it's displayed to the students. So the students will see it very similar to how you're seeing it on the screen. They'll see the one blank, and then they'll see the place to answer that question down here below the question. So they will see the blank here, and then the place to actually answer their question down here. And they can correspond to which blank belongs to which answer based on those numbers. So I think we got a lot of good questions. And we will go on and move on to the next subject, which is importing questions, which pretty much goes over how to add all of those questions pretty easily in a bulk manner. So Nicole will kind of take over talking about that.
So if you were to have your questions in a question bank in another system that you could export, you might be curious if you can import them all in bulk instead of doing it one by one, kind of how we just showed you. So you definitely can do that. We have two options. The first is an RTS import. And right there in the portal, we have links to the formatting instructions as well as a sample file to kind of guide you in your formatting to make sure that it matches what we need for an import file. Another cool thing is these optional filters. So what you can do is select where your questions are coming from, and it can greatly minimize the amount of formatting you have to do. It'll save you a lot of work and a lot of time of matching it directly to our import specifications if you find a good filter that works for you. So here's kind of what the sample file looks like. You'll see you have the question. You can also import the category that needs to be tagged to that question. It's not shown here, but you can import the rationale as well. So the sample file has all those kind of things from the simple to the more complex. The next option is a tab delimited import. Again, we have the formatting instructions in the sample file. It looks a little bit different, but the same idea. You're going to be editing it in a Excel format. So those are kind of the two big buckets that it falls into. And of course, if you have any questions about importing or need help preparing your file, you can contact your account manager or our admin support line and be happy to help you with that. So whichever format you choose, you're going to get to a screen that looks like this once you've chosen your file. So this kind of shows you how many are ready to import, how many were without errors, and also how many errors were found. You have the ability to import the valid questions, those ones that didn't have any problems, and also right to the left you can download the error report, which will tell you each question and what was wrong with it to kind of guide you in your reformatting and help you fix those errors. So before we get into reviewing and editing, we want to just do a quick poll. We kind of gave you the two main options for entering your questions. Either you're going to create them manually or you're going to import them. And obviously it might be a little bit of both, but for the most part, if you could just let us know if importing or manually building your questions is kind of your plan, that would be great as well. So take a minute to do that before we get into reviewing and editing your questions. So it looks like everybody is saying import, and that's very common. We see that a lot since you do have a lot of the times your question bank already in another system. We went over it briefly. Again, if you have any questions specific, just reach out to your account manager and they'd be happy to help you prepare your import spreadsheet and work out any kinks that you have in there.
All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is reviewing and editing those questions that you already created. So from the questions tab, you are able to see all of your previously created questions. And it's going to default to show you my most recently revised questions. So that's going to be a list of questions that you recently revised. Under the search field, you have the ability to search by ID, title, the words that are in the question stem and the question answer. So maybe you don't remember exactly where you put that question, but you're like, I know I talked about depression, or I know I talked about this certain medication. You can go ahead and search for that, and it'll search, again, the question stem, the title, the answers, and the ID number. So if you have that ID number, it's super quick to just type in the ID number. It'll pull up that question for you. We also have an advanced search option, so maybe you're looking for something more specific. Maybe you know the creator. You can search by creator. You can search by if there's an attachment or not. You can search within specific folders, so there's a lot of customization that you can do there. So now we're going to look at the actual question page. So there's a lot of really great information that you can see on these columns. One thing is the status of the question. So Nicole had talked about your two options when saving a question. You have the option to save it as a draft and you have the option to approve it. And she mentioned that only approved questions can be used on an assessment. So this question here is a draft question. We can see that it's got a little pencil icon, meaning we can still edit it. So when I go to the question, it really just looks like our original question. We can still change the answers. We can change the question stem. We can change the weighting. All of that's still editable. Now, if we go back, we can look at an approved question. You'll see that we don't have a pencil icon anymore because we're not able to edit it. We do have a little magnifying glass though. So when we click that, it'll take us to the question. You'll see that everything's kind of saved. There's no place to write anything or change anything. But you'll see that we do have a button down here that says Create New Revision or Edit. That revision button will create a whole new version of this question. And when you click that, you'll be able to edit it. It'll start generating statistics separately from the original version so that you can see how the changes affected this question. You'll also have the option to duplicate this question. So when you revise a question, you are kind of overriding the first revision. You are not able to reuse that first revision that you created. You have to use the new revision that you just created by clicking Create New Revision. But by duplicating, you get to keep the original question and then create a copy of it with a separate ID. So you have both of those options. Now at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see this history section. And this history section has a lot of great information. We have the performance history, which tells you how this question performed. So we have each revision, how many times it was used, what the difficulty level is, how many times distractor A was selected, distractor B. So a lot of really brief item analysis on this. Under assessment history, we have a list of all of the assessments that this question has been used on, as well as which revision was used on which assessment. And then you can easily take this assessment ID, go to the Assessments tab, and search by it to actually pull up the assessment that you want to review because this question was on it. And then at the very bottom, we have the revision history. So if you're on revision 5 or 6, it may be very easy to forget what revision 1 looked like or who even created revision 1. So if you go to this revision history, you're able to see some of the information about each revision, and then you can even click on the revision number, and that'll take you to the actual copy of the previous revision. Before we go on to the next tab, do you guys have any questions about reviewing, editing, anything like that? All right, so we do have one question that I saw come in asking about the revision versus duplication. They just wanted a little bit more clarification on that, so I can go ahead and talk about that a little bit more. For questions that you still want to be able to use, but you want to create another copy of it, maybe for a different purpose, duplicating is definitely the best option because you're still going to be able to use that first copy and then or the first original, and then you'll have a second copy to use. Whereas when you create a new revision, that's going to be usually used in cases where I realize, hey, this distractor is kind of confusing, or maybe I need to make this question a little bit harder. So you can, so you won't be able to use that previous revision, but you are making the change to it as a new revision, so the statistics are kept separate. And somebody just asked, if you revise, you can still see the old version, but you just can't use it on an assessment, and that's correct. So I am able, again, down at this revision history, I can go back and review it, see it as often as I want to. I just won't be able to use it on an assessment because I have a whole new version of it available, yes. Somebody asked, can you delete questions that have been corrected? So when you create a new revision, you're essentially overriding that original one. You are able to delete questions if they have not been used on an assessment previously. But if you have used the question, then we keep it in the system. There's no way to delete it just because we want to keep the history of that information. So I think that's all the questions, it looks like. So if you guys have any further questions, don't hesitate to type them in that questions box. We'll be happy to answer them for you. I'm going to let Nicole talk about preferences.
So preferences is one of the last things we want to talk about. It's a really cool way to save a little bit of time and also hopefully any headaches that come from clicking something incorrectly. So if you find yourself creating questions that have a lot of the same settings over and over again, you can set user-specific settings under My Preferences. So if you go to your name in the top right corner and then choose My Preferences, you'll be brought to a screen that looks like this. You can choose your default folder. If you always want partial credit, if you always have 5 answer choices, you can select that there, and that way those preferences are automatically pulled in whenever you're creating a new question. It kind of saves you a few clicks and also, prevents some errors there when you're creating a question. We have similar preferences for assessment creating and reporting, so kind of saving your favorites almost. So this is a really cool way to save yourself a little bit of time, so we definitely like to point that out.
All right, and so before we leave you guys, we do want to make sure you know where to find some information if you do have any questions. You guys are probably familiar with this. This is the first thing you see when you log into your portal. The first thing I want to point out is the green interactive simulation buttons here. These allow you to pretty much simulate creating a question, creating a category, and it walks you step by step through which questions to click, or which buttons to click, where to fill it out, all that sort of information. So that's really helpful, especially if you have some new users. It just is a really great feature that we've kind of come out with in the past couple months. So if you do have a chance or you have any questions, that's a great place to start. We also have this little graduation cap in the upper right-hand corner. This will allow you to search through our quick reference guides that we have, which are essentially like one-page how-to guides, very quick. How do I create a multiple choice question, or how do I set this up on an assessment, or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of different resources there. There's also a lot of short couple-minute videos that go over everything. We also have this community tab down here. The community is an awesome resource that is available to you as a forum, a message board essentially of other ExamSoft users. You can ask questions, you can give praise, you can report a problem. So when you click that, it'll give you a chance to search through the existing questions before posting your own question. But if we go and look at it, you'll see you can access it through that community tab, or you can go directly to examsoft.com/community. And every month we do an ExamSoft Champion Award, so I do want to give a shout out to our recent champion, Larry Roscoe. He was nominated and won as the Community Einstein. He's from the Medical College of Wisconsin. And we actually just started our new July Awards champion, Psychometric Pursuer. So if you know somebody, or if your institution is really using psychometric data, or you know of an institution really using psychometric data to make a difference, go ahead and nominate them on the community. We'd love to hear about kind of how they're doing. We also use the community as a great place to post updates about new releases, so it's a good thing to sign up for and to be a part of. Finally, we have our traditional support, our administrator support line and email, and our exam taker support line and email. So we have those for you and for your students to use if you do encounter any questions, any problems. So we've had a couple questions come up in the queue, so we're going to go ahead and answer them via typing. If you do have any more questions, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes. But we thank you guys for taking the time to join us today and to listen to us for the past 40 minutes. We're excited that you're excited to learn about this. So if you would like a certificate of participation, or you just want to tell us how we did, go ahead and complete the survey that pops up when you leave. We'd love to hear your feedback. And there's a section in there if you do want a certificate of participation to indicate that. So thank you guys.